There you are. So we wanted to begin this. As you know, we're the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, and as we've discussed before, our meetings are open. So we're going to be recording this meeting as we have in our previous meetings. So you'll see that that note on your invite. So that others can access this information if they wish to. So we thought it was time for an update. It's been a very busy time for the Access to Counsel and Evictions Initiative, and we thought it was important for the task force to come together now so that we can understand where the initiative stands, what's going on with the program, and also have a little recap about the legislative agenda. We did very well. We're excited. You're going to hear in a minute that the legislative session really helped bolster the program, the implementation of the program. We were successful in getting funding for the first couple of years for the program, so that's terrific, and you'll hear more about that. Implementation is off to a start, and Deb Seltzer from Maryland Legal Services Corporation and Karen are here. You're going to meet the person who's going to be helping with that implementation, and we're also going to hear from Rena about data, sort of the beginning of how we're going to get data on this program as well. So that's just briefly what the agenda is going to look like. We're going to tick through that, and you're welcome, of course, to ask questions. Some folks have been deeply in the weeds or been very active in the legislative session, and then others in our task force, not so much. So we want to make sure everybody's in the same place so that when it comes time to assess and evaluate and consider what recommendations should go forward, we have good background for that and understand sort of the state of play for the program. So with that, welcome everybody, and we're going to begin. And I think at this time, we're going to start with a legislative update and really just hear what happened in the legislative session and where we are in terms of the program. And I'm going to turn, I believe, Leah, are you going to be providing that this morning?
I'm at least gonna give it a yeoman's shot, and then there are lots of experts on here who can jump in and correct or add as needed.
Okay.
So good morning, everybody. Legislative update. So Vicki kind of mentioned the real headline, which is that the legislature and the governor have provided funding for this program for FY23, which starts July 1, 2022, and then a head start on funding for FY24. So the total for this coming fiscal year is $11.8 million, which, as you'll recall, is at least in the neighborhood of what the task force recommended in the report that was issued in January. And of that, 5.4 million is coming through the second tranche of federal ERAP funds. And then an additional 6.4 million was included in the Judiciary's budget as part of the operating budget for the state. And that the budget document is Senate Bill 290 for that. And if you have questions about that, I'll just tick through, but if you have questions, feel free to interrupt or raise your hand, and I'll try and answer any questions. Although I will tell you up front that if you have specific questions about any of this, I will probably be deferring to the experts, and specifically with respect to funding, Deb and Karen from Mlsc will be, I would think, best situated to handle any specific questions about that. So the other legislative effort that was successful for FY24 is SB 662, and that is going to give direct $14 million to the Access to Counsel and Evictions program through the Abandoned Property Fund. And then the last piece of it is going to be that HB 571 and SB 279, and I see Delegate Rosenberg is on, and he was the lead sponsor of this effort in the House. There are going to be sort of a set of supplemental funds, or at least in theory, supplemental funds that will come from certain recoveries from Consumer Protection Division cases that are final settlements or judgments based on rental housing cases will be directed to the Access to Counsel and Evictions Special Fund. There were a couple other funding related efforts that either became moot or died that I will just mention briefly. So there was an effort to provide a mandatory appropriation of rental assistance funds, but that sort of was overtaken by the announcement of ERAP 2 funds being directed to this effort. And then there were some filing fee bills that didn't move past the committees, and the task force, as you know, was strongly divided on those efforts. And so the task force did not weigh in publicly on those bills. Okay, so now I'm going to move on.
One note, Leah, is that we did provide, as Leah mentioned, we sort of stayed kind of in the boundaries of the task force report and the recommendations. There were lots of other bills popping on many different topics, but we really tried to stay focused in how the task force would show up at the legislative session. And the submitted testimony is on the shared drive too. So if anybody wants to see what was said, it won't be surprising to you. That written testimony is there as well for you to review.
Thank you, Vicki, for flagging that. And I think in the rest of my little report, I have indicated what the task force did in terms of weighing in. But that's true that it's all there. And I didn't flag it for these bills, but in general, the task force submitted written and/or oral testimony in favor of funding the program, but not with respect to any of the filing fee bills. So moving on, I'm just going to touch briefly on data collection. Rena is going to cover this in more depth during her section of updates, but HB 824 is a bill that would mandate certain collection and reporting out of data from failure to pay rent filings and other eviction cases. And I'm sure that my friends from the Judiciary and Rena can talk more about sort of the details of that. It went through a fair amount of debate and revision during the session. But in general, the task force provided written and oral testimony in support of those efforts to collect and get more granular data from court cases about evictions, specifically sort of geographically targeted information. And then there are just a couple other things that I have on my list, and then I would not be at all surprised if I forgot anything, so I'll open up the floor to anybody who can help save me from myself. But so there was an effort to mandate a stay of a certain amount of time for landlords or tenants to access eviction prevention services. The main bills on that were SB 564 and HB 691. The task force submitted written testimony in support of that. I think both of those efforts died in committee, and so they were not enacted. But again, all of the testimony that the task force submitted is available in the share drive for you to peruse at your convenience. And a separate and related but different effort did make it across the finish line, and that is SB 384, which mandates a short stay in eviction proceedings to essentially facilitate or mitigate delays in the distribution of rental assistance. And so that, because it was not directly related to the access to counsel and evictions program in the task force, we monitored that. We didn't actually weigh in with any written or oral testimony, but it did pass, and I believe it's on the governor's desk. And that's essentially just to sort of help. And it does provide, and others I'm sure can talk more and better about this, but it does provide, it's not sort of a across the board stay. It's the tenant has to show that they have they've made an effort to apply for rental assistance. And if that threshold showing is met, then it provides for a stay in the eviction proceeding in order for the local governments to get that money out the door. That is everything I have on my list. So Vicki, I'll turn it back over to you, and then also invite you or anyone else to chime in and say if I've missed anything.
I think you covered everything, Leah. Are there other comments or questions? Or Sandy, Delegate Rosenberg, rather?
Sandy's fine. Oh, or not. That's even better than Professor. Okay. Does the abandoned property fund legislation provide the same amount of funding or sufficient funding for FY24?
Deb, you want to take that?
Sure. So the abandoned property funding for FY24 is $14 million, which is an increase from the just under 12 million we'll have for this year. The original projection for the kind of second full year of the program was closer to, I think, the $20 million mark. However, I think we'll have a better sense of that maybe midway through the next year, before the next session starts, so that because we'll know the kind of better pace of implementation. Part of what we're going to be talking about when we talk about implementation is how long it may take. One, if we see an uptick in evictions as rental assistance funds start to run out, that could impact the pace. Two is the kind of very tight hiring market right now and how long it takes the individual providers to hire up enough attorneys to be doing these services. So there are many things that will impact the implementation over the next, say, 6 months that I think we will need to reevaluate before the next session starts to see whether that 14 million will be sufficient.
Thank you.
Great. Are there other questions on legislative matters? Any other additions from folks around the task force? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to really, in many ways, the heart of this meeting, which is the implementation efforts. Much has been happening to implement the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. As Deb said, you know, there's many challenges in doing so, but we thought that hearing from Maryland Legal Services Corporation about the various requests for proposals that are out and the potential, what the implementation initiatives are, would be helpful, and to introduce Karen. So Deb, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can talk us through the current implementation.
Thanks, Vicki. Leah, can I share my screen? Can I have permission to share my screen?
Yes, thank you for the reminder. I have to move you to a presenter, and then you should be good to go.
Got it. Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay. So I am going to start with just a brief introduction and then turn it over to Karen to go through the details for us. But as was just said, we're very excited that we're really kicking off now and with some stability. So as we just discussed, the legislative session provided 2 years of stable funding. We are still waiting on some details on the logistics of those various buckets of state funding, and which includes both kind of how Mlsc will access the money, but also some of the restrictions on them. There are some related to ERAP that we're still working through a little bit with DHCD, with the Department of Housing and Community Development, and some on the state money that we need to make sure we know the full details around. But we're working with various state departments on that and hope to have final clarification on that soon. This first year, FY23, which will really be the true first year of service implementation, will be a bit of a transitional year as we're working to beef up legal services in an implementation plan, but also make sure that existing legal services that may, for example, be in a county that's not prioritized for initial implementation don't just drop off. We want to make sure that we're at least maintaining the level of service in those counties while expanding in the priority counties. So that's something that we're paying close attention to. So just something to think about as we talk about all these RFPs, that this first year is really going to be transitional, making sure services continue, and then will be a more full-formed program in year 2 and 3. We're also in continued discussion with Baltimore City to ensure that their right to counsel program, which they had their own city law about, is in good coordination with the statewide access to counsel program. There are some differences in terms of eligibility, in terms of case types that are available, but we still want to make sure that that's kind of a solid program that is working in concert together with the statewide program. So we're talking to them on that. Perhaps most excitedly for Mlsc, I'm very pleased to introduce Karen Waback, who joined us as our program manager for Access to Counsel in Evictions. She joined Mlsc in March after spending the last 10 years with the Homeless Persons Representation Project, one of the legal services providers, and most recently serving as their Director of Housing Justice. So I will now turn it over to Karen to give us a run through of the slides here.
Thanks, Deb, and it's nice to meet you all. I'm really happy to be here. This is the start of my 8th week, so this will be sort of a screenshot of what we've been up to these last 7 weeks. So to start with sort of the core bedrock of the Access to Counsel in Evictions program, and that's the provision of legal services to tenants who are facing eviction. Mlsc issued an application for FY23 eviction prevention funding in March, and we received 10 applications from legal services providers across the state. We are currently in the process of reviewing those applications, developing an implementation map based on the statutory requirements, prioritizing those jurisdictions who have put up their own funds, and as Deb just mentioned, ensuring that current services in the other jurisdictions don't lapse in the meantime. So it's a bit of a puzzle that we are working our way through, and our goal is to have services begin by July 1st. We also, Mlsc's board approved an application from Equal Justice Works to bring their housing justice program into Maryland. You may remember that this is a program that they piloted in Richmond, Virginia previously with great success. So we're really thrilled that they're bringing the program to Maryland. Mlsc will be using carryover funds from the Attorney General's bank settlement to fund 9 attorney fellows through this Equal Justice Works program. Those 9 fellows will be hosted by a number of legal services providers across the state, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and then the Eastern Shore. And this is a 2-year fellowship program. So EJW's goal is to have fellows in place and starting work in August. So it'll be August 22 to August 2024. EJW also secured additional funding from a number of foundations that will support 1 additional attorney fellow and 4 community organizing fellows who will work very closely with the attorney fellows and the legal services programs across the state. And Equal Justice Works went live, I think, last week with their application for host applications in Maryland. So that all is really exciting and moving forward. And we feel that this is a really important effort in building the pipeline of eviction defense attorneys. As Deb mentioned, it's a real challenge hiring in any context these days, and especially with the additional funding that's available. We really want to be conscious of doing things that help to build the pipeline of attorneys. And to that end, we are also in conversation with both of the law schools here in Maryland about how they can be involved, both in providing legal services and helping to build that pipeline. Next slide. Great. So the next thing we've been working on is the coordinated intake system. Mlsc issued an RFP last month for a coordinated intake pilot. We did decide to focus the pilot on Baltimore City for the first year, fiscal year 2023. And the RFP was for sort of 3 components to this coordinated intake system. One telephone number that tenants would call to start the process and get connected with legal representation. Second is a web-based client portal for intake. And third, an electronic referral system. And the proposals are actually due today. So we hope to have a better idea soon of what that is going to look like in the first year. And we think that framing this pilot, approaching this pilot in Baltimore City this first year will give us an opportunity to try some things out, see what works, make adjustments before expanding into other jurisdictions during implementation. Okay, in program evaluation news, Mlsc issued a request for proposals and received 2 responses. And we ultimately selected Stout, Rishis, Ross to be the program evaluator due to their subject matter expertise. So you may be familiar with the report that Stout authored for Baltimore City regarding the cost-benefit analysis of a right to counsel. And Stout is also handling program evaluation in Cleveland, in Milwaukee, and in Connecticut. So they really are experts in this work, and we're excited to work with them on program evaluation over the next 3 years. We are awaiting a revised proposal from the other applicant, however, to still be involved in conducting tenant focus groups. And those focus groups are likely to start in the second half of FY 2023 once legal representation services have started. And so we're looking forward to having that, that component as well. Right, great. In terms of training, this was another area that was covered in the task force's report. Mlsc has developed a substantive and skills-based training program for all attorneys who will be working in the Access to Counsel in Evictions program, including supervisors. The program that we've developed will have 3 sort of tracks of training based on the person's role and their years of experience. So we'll have a supervisor's track, we will have a track for less experienced attorneys, and a track for more experienced attorneys. And we think this will help in targeting the training that will be most useful to those folks. We are also deep into planning a symposium kickoff event for September 30th. It will be hosted at the University of Maryland Law School. This will be a one-day, all-day training for attorneys participating in the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. We anticipate having a number of plenary sessions on cultural competency, a tenant panel to make sure that the tenants' voices are heard, and hopefully a featured speaker as well. And then there'll be 5 to 6 hours of training for the attorneys as well. Next slide, I think we have our save the date. Yes, so the symposium will conclude with a kickoff reception, 5 to 6:30 on September 30th. So consider this your save the date. We would love for you all to be there. We'll be welcoming members of the legislature and the judiciary as well, just to really have that moment of celebration for all that has been accomplished so far, and really kick off all of the work that is to come. So we hope that you'll be able to join us then. And then last but not least is just a glimpse of sort of our ongoing work and what we will be working on over the next several months. So MLSC is participating in a bi-monthly national meeting of other eviction right to counsel programs focused specifically on implementation. This is a group convened by the National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel. And we've covered a number of topics so far, including funding and training, and then building the pipeline, because that is a real concern and a real challenge nationwide, not just here in Maryland. And then you'll see we are also meeting regularly with other states' IOLTA programs that are administering eviction prevention funds as well, to share successes and information. And sort of our to-do list between now and July 1st, we will be, of course, reviewing those applications from legal services providers, meeting with the providers to ensure that we're ready to go on July 1st, reviewing proposals for that coordinated intake pilot in Baltimore City, developing a request for proposals for the tenant outreach and education piece, which is an important part of the program, continuing our planning for the September 30th symposium, and then collaborating with our program evaluator Stout and the legal services providers around data collection. So that is what we have been up to and where we're headed. So thank you for letting us share that with you.
Thank you, Karen. That's a lot of work. Maybe we can stop, and maybe we can share then the PowerPoint with the group, just because, so we have all that. It's a lot of information, a lot of activity, pretty impressive in such a short time. Let's see, are there questions from the group about some of the components here? I know a lot of it's underway. I have one, or maybe I'll start us off, and please feel free to jump in, task force members. My one question was about the evaluation, and maybe it's premature. Do we have kind of a time frame or a schedule for how the evaluation will be going? I know there's certain requirements, Deb, for MLSC to report to the legislature. Could you talk us through a little bit about how that's going to work, since our job is to evaluate and assess the program? Thanks.
So we have a meeting coming up with Stout to go through some of the things. One of the things that we provided them was all of the task force materials. So they had, we sent them the website that had all the minutes and recordings from the task force and committee meetings. We'll be meeting with them in a few weeks to solidify that timeline. Part of the the very beginning piece will be right after we make grant decisions for the legal services providers, so that we're able to get in ahead on the data collection piece and talk to the legal services providers about how they can best collect that data. You know, we want to weigh the kind of making sure we have enough data to fully implement the program with the administrative burden that we know it is going to take for the providers to actually collect the information. The other piece that has to work in there is the various evaluation or data required for the funding streams. So ERAP requires a specific set of data. There is potentially Baltimore City money that will require a specific set of data. There were some data collection requirements put into that budget line item for Mlsc to provide. Most of it is related to case data and outcomes, and so mostly things we already collect. But for example, ERAP has other attestation requirements that tenants will have to show, you know, like why their income was impacted by COVID or that kind of thing. So to varying levels of degree, depending on the funding source. If, you know, the city decides to use CDBG money, which it's looking likely they have a specific coronavirus pot, that is even more stringent about the types of things that are required. So we will have a timeline from Stout that will be solidified once we have this meeting with them that we will be happy to share. We're already envisioning at least a 3-year process to kind of make sure as we go through full implementation, you know, we're following along and adjusting as needed. So we'll be able to get, you know, kind of real-time feedback as we need it, and we can also make sure we have baseline information so that we can do the evaluation.
Great. And is there also, I'm recalling a deadline in August or something that you need?
So the August deadline is the HB 18 deadline, the access to counsel statute. Mlsc has to do our first report to the governor and legislature. That one is mostly kind of basically what has happened over the past year and how many tenants received services. So the first report will be mostly about this kind of setup implementation work. Mlsc has funded, you know, has funded eviction prevention legal services, but not technically as part of access to counsel. So we'll mention that, but that won't be the main focus of that report. This will mostly be it will be a very similar to this PowerPoint, basically, of here are the steps we've taken to do implementation so far.
Okay, all right, well, it's good. I think Sandy, I was just going to say one more thing. For the task force, it'll be important to think about what the reporting requirements are already on Mlsc, so that the task force, you know, works in conjunction with those and doesn't add an additional burden, but rather kind of uses the similar timeline. So it may be up to the task force in September. We wouldn't want to ask for information ahead of the requirement to provide that to the governor and the legislature, for example. So just something to be cognizant of as we go forward in the work. Yes, Delegate Rosenberg.
Sure. Is the judiciary prepared for implementation of the law and providing access to counsel?
So that is something that we are going to be in continued contact, especially with the district court about. We have had some conversations right now, since we are in this initial implementation will not quite be statewide, but we will be talking to them about various, for example, courtroom or court space that might be available or might not be available. So that will help, especially with where we need to make sure we're very heavily invested in the pre-trial intake, which we know that would be the best way to connect tenants. We hope that they get connected before, but we also recognize that some are just going to show up at court and not have heard of access to counsel. How can we connect them on the day of? So we'll be talking with them and also with the self-help centers, which are very active at the district court level across the state, with how do we make sure that people can get into the right spot. Pam, did you have something?
I was just going to add, Delegate Rosenberg, that I do know Chief Judge Mlsc is in the process of contracting with a rent court coordinator. There's a plan to begin with at least a person. I don't know if that will end up being more than a person, but they're definitely focused on trying to be prepared.
My guess is it's going to be iterative, and and fortunately, it's not in every jurisdiction all at once. We'll be able to roll this along. Yes, Jessica.
I'm wondering what is being planned in terms of publicity so that tenants are becoming aware of the program, so we can get to folks before they get to the day of court.
Sure. So a lot of that is a little dependent on this coordinated intake pilot and how that shakes out, because what we'd like to do is, rather than put out, which is what the current system kind of is here's the list of legal services providers, we'd rather have this kind of one central number, at least to start in Baltimore City, so that someone can help them make the best decision, or either say, okay, here's the provider I think is the best match for you, and have a follow along. So if, for example, there's a conflict with one provider, we can quickly move to the next provider. So that will be part of it, is what comes out of this coordinated intake. But yes, there will also be, for number one, we are also developing the required pamphlet that is in the statute that will go with, I believe, the summons. So there will be that piece, and then we'll be thinking about, when we do the tenant outreach and education RFP, how to tie the final pieces into there. We think that there may be some more mass advertising type things. We know the court has done a good job, for example, for the self-help centers with the bus stop flyers and billboards or things like that. But we really think that targeted outreach through the community groups is going to be the best way to reach tenants, and also build some trust in the program, to say, like, for a group of folks who may have not had a great experience with the court system, or to say, no, this is a program that you really should reach out to ahead of time so that they can help you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and the Equal Justice Works, one of the benefits of that program is that it includes, thanks to some gifts from philanthropy for community organizers, which will also help kind of on the ground to help. But I think some mass media, once there is one number, one website, and everything, you don't want to do it prematurely, but to drive people to those outlets would be important. So, and our friends in the courts know something about that, as well as in DHCD. They've done that with rental assistance. So I think there's some opportunities to coordinate that outreach going forward. Okay. Are there other questions about implementation? There's a lot of information in that PowerPoint.
And if anyone, thinks of anything or has particular ideas, please feel free to reach out to Mlsc. We're happy to, walk through things, or, and as Karen said, we're also definitely learning from other states and jurisdictions that are doing this work. We're kind of all learning at the same time, as, these are brand new programs, both for several states and now several cities. I believe New Orleans just became the most recent jurisdiction to pass right to counsel for their tenants. But again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Okay. Further questions on implementation? I don't see anything else. Okay. All right. I'm looking to see. All right. I think we're going to jump a little bit. Rena Shaw was going to join us on eviction data, just talk to us a little bit about where we're heading in that direction. We had some success with the bill there. She is not on the line yet, so I'm going to jump ahead.
I'm here, Vicki.
Oh, Rita, you are there. Okay, sorry, didn't tell the phone number. Are you okay? Can you talk about eviction data with us?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, this would be a great time, actually. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So kudos, obviously, to Mlsc for having done that so much work. And then also for all of the work that we did in the legislature as a team. So one of the bills, as Leah talked about, had to do with eviction data. This is something that, is not necessarily new in the legislature, but it did get an oomph, and in relation to the fact that we really needed this data to implement this program properly. It was really urgent. And that was the message that we were pushing. Essentially, what we get in terms of eviction data at present is that the judiciary has a report that they put on their website, and we're not sure exactly if it's updated monthly, but they do have sort of a recurrence, and they report statewide, and also break it down by counties in terms of how many evictions are happening and how many warrants of restitution were granted and how many failure to pay rent filings happened. But what we didn't have was sort of more granular data. We didn't have an understanding of, well, what types of cases are these evictions related to, what zip codes, and where are these evictions actually happening? Because if you have county information, that's good. That's a start, but we don't know if there's certain areas of the county that are further hit. Something that obviously we'd want to get to, because one of the key tenets of also this task force and this work was that we want to make sure we have an equity lens as we're looking through implementation. We want to make sure that the areas that need it the most are the ones that are getting the help that they need, and so data was super important for that. One hard part of this data collection is trying to figure out sort of the racial equity analysis and impact, and that's something obviously that we'll work with sort of experts on, but that information is not available through sort of the direct case information, and so there needs to be some additional work that needs to be analysis done to sort of at least figure out kind of the racial impact. The bill did have language that essentially how the bill is going to work is that the judiciary has to report on a monthly basis every 30 days, and they will be sending that report to DHCD. DHCD is already sort of the hub of housing-related information and data. And they've been doing all of the data reporting for the rental assistance programs, and so we really thought that was the right avenue. But in addition, the bill also provides for data to be shared with academic institutions for the purposes of analysis. And so there could be in the future, something joint between DHCD and an academic institution to do further analysis on the data, so that we do have a better equity analysis. So the bill will become effective instead of October of this year. It will become effective January 1st of next year. So that was one of the sort of compromises that was reached in order to get the bill passed. And so we will start receiving this data then. And I don't think I'm forgetting anything, but if anyone else wants to chime in on other aspects. So, moving forward, we do need to have sort of coordination, obviously, with the judiciary and DHCD, and really think about, what way the visualization of the data, or what way will it be most helpful for the implementation of this program, but also, when we start thinking of a lot of what the data committee did talk about and did work through was, well, how can this data be used for outreach purposes? And so really thinking through that as well. But it was significant that we will be receiving this more granular data, sort of related to the case and also related to sort of the zip code and address level information on who is actually getting the filings, who's getting the warrant, and who's actually being evicted. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions.
Questions for Rena? I would just note that I think for this task force, this will be important to our work, to determine just exactly, to assess the program, you need data. And I think that was one of the things that we urgently pleaded with the legislature, that we just need some better data so that we can really be able to do this. But my guess is it will evolve. The needs for data and what's possible will evolve too, as the judiciary also is in the process of implementing some different types of systems that may make it less onerous to be able to provide certain kinds of data. So we're hoping that's the case over time so that we can have a better sense of how the program is working, who it's serving, where it's, where the needs are, so that the resources can be targeted appropriately and equitably. Are there any other thoughts on that, on data? Any questions about that? It's only, okay, fair enough. Okay. All right, well then I think we're humming right along on this Monday morning. And the final thing we just wanted to talk to you about was some transitions, some leadership transitions. I am going to be, you may have seen this, I'm going to be leaving University of Baltimore School of Law a little later this month. And I'm leaving to become the new executive director for Maryland Legal Aid, which role I'll assume on May 31st. So with that transition became another need for transition for the task force. I really am going to be unable, I think I was well suited in my current role at the university to do this job, to head the task force, and I very much enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed working with all of you and working through a lot of these issues, trying to figure out what would make for a good access to counsel and evictions program here in Maryland. But I think my work ahead is going to be very focused and will need to be so. So in that case, it really is time for me to step down as task force chair and to pass the torch to someone else. And the Attorney General has tapped Rena Shaw, who leads the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, to lead the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force. So I'm very pleased to note that. I think it's a great pick. The Access to Justice Commission is deep into this work, and Rena has been very active. As you know, she headed one of the committees. So I'm very excited to be able to pass the baton, pass the torch to Rena to be able to chair the task force going forward. So this is going to be my last meeting as chair and maybe my last meeting, but I will obviously stay connected to the work. I'll be a little more in the trenches, on the front lines, working on the implementation in my new role. But I think we'll really appreciate hearing from the task force about what's working well and how we can continue to improve this program as it evolves. So I just really wanted a chance to be able to tell all of you that. I do think, as I mentioned, there you go, Rena. There we go. So, but it will be important, we are kind of mapping as we go along. I mentioned earlier to this group that Mlsc will have some reporting to do under HB 18 in August. So it may be appropriate then to come together again in September when that reporting is done, so you can find out what the state of play. The RFPs will have been awarded by then. You'll have a much better sense of what's going on with the program, and then be able to discuss, what kinds of recommendations, what's needed still to support this program, and do that kind of scan. You've got some great folks now who are fully engaged in this work at Mlsc, and having Karen is awesome. And then also just being able to look ahead at where the gaps are and how this is going to evolve. So there we go. She's back. So, okay. So that was really the last bit of information. There's just more ahead, but I know the work will continue, and I'm very excited about this group continuing this role in oversight. All right. Okay. Well, we don't want to belabor. No need to elongate a meeting that doesn't need to be this long. So I appreciate your coming together for this meeting. Please stay tuned. Rena Shaw with the capable assistance of, I want to thank first too, I should have done this from the outset, Leah Toulin, who's been a tremendous partner in this work. As I mentioned before, she really has done so much to keep the task force on task, but also substantively. She is, you know, a brilliant lawyer and a great thinker, and she's really helped us hone and support our recommendations with a lot of terrific research. And I just want to personally thank her for her tireless work to keep this task force going and this initiative moving forward. So thank you so much, Leah, for that. And to my other friends in the Attorney General's office, David Epler, who's been terrific, guiding the work along, and Hannibal and many others who've really helped support it from the AGs. I know that support will continue for Rena Shaw, and it'll be vitally important. So thanks again. All right. Okay, any other thoughts, questions, comments, anything? All right. Well,
I just want to say congratulations, of course, Vicki, on your new position, and thanks for all you've done. You certainly exercised a tremendous amount of leadership, and it's amazing to stand here today and look back at how the conversation's changed over the last 20 years, really, on this topic and where we stand today. So lots of great leadership here, but thank you, especially Vicki.
Not the least of which is yours, Pam, because you've been doing this for those 20 years and you've been leading us all along. So we really appreciate you as well. And I feel very confident with you on the task force that it'll help guide us along. So thank you very much too. All right. Okay, well, thanks again, and expect to hear from the AG's office and Rena going forward for your next meeting. I'll see you around. All right, take care. Bye-bye.